Now can you see why the vile Earl Warren and his equally vile co-Supreme Court justices issued that infamous and treasonous desegregation decision in 1954? It was to aid and abet the plot of the Illuminati conspirators to create tension and strife between Negroes and whites. Can you see why the same Earl Warren issued his decision prohibiting Christian prayers and Christmas carols in our schools? It was done to destroy Christianity. Can you see why Eisenhower, despite all the rigid constitutional prohibitions, sent federal troops into a southern state to enforce the desegregation decision?
I imagine what you're wondering, what Supreme Court decision was he talking about? 1954. That was the Brown versus Board. Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka was a landmark 1954 Supreme Court case in which the justices ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional. Okay. There gets into a little bit of history here. So before that, you had Jim Crow laws in the South. Get into that, but that's what he's talking about as being treasonous. I mean, I guess I have a problem with this. I have a problem with denying that there was any racism and racial, black people being treated really bad. And before, I see some good in some of the civil rights. I do see that, like some socialists, I know most of the founders of these organizations that advocated for African American rights were socialists. I acknowledge that. But, do you throw the baby out with the bathwater? Should we have just kept Jim Crow laws and kept things the way they were? Anyways, yeah. So he says that was a plot by the Illumined ones, by the Illuminati, to stir up strife between whites and blacks. Of course, I showed you this in one of my previous videos, showing that not only was he, concerned about, divide and conquer, whites and blacks being, set up to fight each other, whatever, but that he genuinely was racist. It's what the whole point of this book here was about. The masterminds of the Great Conspiracy. White nations and civilizations were destroyed throughout the past centuries whenever the Negroes, as he called them, would come in. He says that he argues, this is funny, he cites a anthropologist. It's funny, the editor of this website here could not verify this supposed quote from this anthropologist saying that the Egyptians were of the white race. He couldn't find anything to verify that. Probably one of those misquotes, right? But anyways, he obviously right here is saying that, the Egyptians maintained their racial purity to a very high degree for the amazing period of 27 centuries due to their freedom from any direct contact with the Negroid Nubians. Yep. So, The methods they employed, this is during the time when they, kept their racial purity. The methods they employed to administer their provinces were very, very closely resembled the state governments established by the founders of our country. In every respect, they appeared to be founding a civilization which cannot be destroyed, exactly as our civilization supposedly was, until the present plottings to destroy it. Oh, you mean that time when we had slavery? But it was during those many centuries of progress and of creative accomplishment and enlightenment that the Egyptians were making the basic errors which were one day to accumulate into a single great factor directly responsible for their decay and eventual destruction. That single great factor came with the mingling of the black and white races, exactly the same basic errors we have been making during the past several decades, and particularly in this decade. Oh, yeah. Get into this, but I just want to get most of his, trying to find his racist comments. As time went by and the Negro slaves achieved freedom by one means or another, the ancient records show that the character of the population was becoming materially changed. The steady increase of Negroes was making them an integral part of the civilization, as an accompanying admixture with the Egyptians progressed on an ever-widening and decaying scale, exactly as it is in the U.S. today. Here's another very significant similarity of what happened in ancient Egypt and what is going on in our country today. When the so-called integrationists, plotters in Egypt, carried on their fight for the freedom of the African slaves. Their cries were that the Egyptian people were directly responsible for the enslavements, that they had raided African villages, carried the inhabitants off into slavery. The truth of the matter was that the Egyptian slave traders had made deals with the African chiefs. Anyways, he says that, but our abolitionists and present integrationists are blaming all the American people, virtually accusing us of kidnapping all those Africans and sold them into slavery to work on the plantations in the South. In short, the very same thing that happened in ancient Egypt that finally destroyed that civilization is repeating itself in our country and will destroy our civilization. This is important to understand what he's saying here. Unless congressional action will reveal the truth and prevent the mongrelization of the American people, which will destroy our civilization. And it just goes on. But I think you don't have to be a rocket scientist to get what he's pushing here in this book here. Is that he's pushing, both Jim Crow laws in order to prevent the mongrelization of the American people. So he's not just, he's saying that making black people a part of society, part of, being equal in society, is an evil plot by Satan, basically, or the Illuminati, to destroy our country. And unless we bring back Jim Crow laws, we'll be destroyed. See? It just goes on. Come on, people. I first ran into this years back when I researched Myron Fagan. After I was shown the Illuminati CFR audio, after I was shown this, I think it was one of the Hour of the Time broadcast shows by Bill Cooper. He was playing him, so I looked him up, and he had a list of books online, and I found this. And it was always ringing in the back of my head. I didn't fully take this serious until now, or the past few years. But it's always in the back of my mind, wondering why Bill Cooper, who we believe is obviously married to a Chinese woman, obviously in some of his shows he ousted, he called out racism, racist agendas, why he didn't bother, or he didn't know that Myron C. Fagan himself was a racist. And why promote him as a good source of research when there were times that he said, hey, if he would do that with Alex Jones, even though Alex Jones could be considered a good source of research. He told people not to listen to him later on because he's been shown to engage in disinformation. Well, this right here is disinformation, but he never bothered to tell anybody that one of the godfathers of this conspiracy movement was a racist. Just more to show you. Take it easy. Have a good night.